Hello to Matthew and Lauren and Maggie who had to miss yesterday. I hope everything's going well at your house and will have a good Christmas. But here's a repeat of what we talked about yesterday. Not exactly the same, but close enough. Now I'm just now going to ignore you and we're just going to have class here as if you don't exist. Okay. Um, Carter's laughing at me. Carter, give me the poem. Okay, so this last week, you guys spent the week with Keats, and oh, calm down. We read the Chapman's Homer poem last week together, and I kind of explained it. But I would like to read La Belle Dame sans Merci out loud. Did you like this one?
Yeah.
I kind of felt like you would like this poem. I don't know why, but I thought you would like this poem. Okay.
I like them all.
You just like poems. Okay.
It's a wide range to go.
That's true. That's true. Okay. What can ail thee, wretched wight, alone and palely loitering? The sedge is withered from the lake, and no birds sing. And right there at the end of that stanza, it always, whenever I read this, it jolts me because listen to the way the meter changes. What can ail thee, wretched wight, alone and palely loitering? The sedge is withered from the lake, and no birds sing. There's not enough syllables. And you notice how each one, it hits it, no birds sing. It's actually called a spondaic is when you just punch every syllable is emphasized. And it always catches me. You're like, oh, what's going to happen? It arrests my attention. He repeats, what can ail thee, wretched wight, so haggard and so woebegone? The squirrel's granary is full, and the harvest done. I see a lily on thy brow. What do you think that means? Does he have an actual flower on his head? What color are lilies often?
White.
White. And so if he has a lily on his brow, what is that poetic code for, do you think? If someone's looking white,
Pale?
you're very pale. You look pale. With anguish moist and fever dew. Your forehead is pale and you're perspiring. In other words, you don't look so good. You got a problem. Why, are you sick? Seriously, this is poetic code for that. And on thy cheek a fading rose fast withereth too. Okay, your cheeks are usually rosy, but not now. Okay, so he's asked a question. Now the guy's going to answer. This is the wretched wight answering what his problem is. I met a lady in the meads, full beautiful, a fairy's child. Her hair was long, her foot was light, and her eyes were wild. I set her on my pacing steed, and nothing else saw all day long, for sideways she would lean and sing a fairy's song. I made a garland for her head, and bracelets too, and fragrant zone. She looked at me as she did love, and made sweet moan. She found me roots of relish sweet, and honey wild, and manna dew. And sure in language strange she said, I love thee true. She took me to her elfin grot, and there she gazed and sighed deep. And there I shut her wild sad eyes, so kissed to sleep. And there we slumbered on the moss, and there I dreamed, woe betide, the latest dream I ever dreamed on the cold hillside. I saw pale kings and princes too, pale warriors, death pale were they all, who cried, La Belle Dame sans Merci hath thee in thrall. I saw their starved lips in the gloam, with horrid warning gaped wide, and I awoke and found me here on the cold hillside. And this is why I sojourn here, alone and palely loitering, though the sedge is withered from the lake, and no birds sing. Thank you, Carter. So this poor guy has been basically kidnapped by a fairy lady. And do you remember, we talked about fairies some last year. Do you remember when we read the King Arthur stories? The creepy women who would lead someone, I don't know what else to call them, but creepy, who would lead someone astray, and then if they passed the test, like the tents, everything would just disappear on them. Right? Or, oh, come get on my boat, and then suddenly they're chained up in a dungeon after they get on the boat because they're bewitched somehow. These romantic poets that we've been talking about, they they like to celebrate the individual and they like to celebrate nature, but also sometimes otherworldliness, and fairies are definitely otherworldly. And I've told you guys, fairies are not, these aren't the cute little sitting on the flower fairies, you know, like Hallmark card fairies. These are not entities you want to mix with. Do you remember when we read Sir? No, we didn't. Um, did you read a retelling of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight? Like, was it in your Dorothy Mills
I
book?
think
Was
it
there a
was.
part of it? Or
It
we
was
talked about
in.
it?
Um. There was. Yeah, I think it was. I think there was like a section
They
on it
mentioned
in
they
Dorothy
mentioned that it
Mills.
had excerpts
I
from
know
it.
it was either that or we read like a book that had like like small short stories in it too.
Oh yes.
I think that might have
Oh
been.
yeah, it was in the King Arthur book.
Yeah.
Yes. Um, it, so the poetic retelling of that, it's an Old English poem, and there's a collection of it that Tolkien translated. And one of the other poems in that collection, it came from the same manuscript, is called Sir Orfeo, and it's all about a guy whose wife got kidnapped by fairies, and he goes to visit. He goes to find her because he wants to get his wife back, and he goes, and there's all these people who have been kidnapped, but there's also dead people there, like people who are believed to be dead, and it's unsure, like, are these people alive? Are these? It's very hazy, and some of the especially in the King Arthur stories, some of these poems, the line between fairyland and death, fairyland and our land is very not much of a demarcation. Sam Schoonmaker and Nate Devlin and I have been just doing a book discussion group this year, and we read one of Tolkien's short stories, Smith of Wootton Major, and it's all about a man that goes back and forth from the fairy world to the real world. And you go walking, and then suddenly you realize you're in fairy, but you didn't pass a sign. You know, there wasn't a gate that you went through. Now you're in fairyland. It's this very, I don't know, it fascinates me how this idea came about. But anyway, this is another thing the Romantic poets like to talk about, like the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which I had you read, is also rather creepy and otherworldly. He shoots an albatross and everybody falls down dead, and he's cursed. What? So that gives you an idea. For next week, Catherine, you look like you want to say something.
You know what I would
Here's my
love?
papers.
A book of poems translated by you.
Oh, my commentary, the Mrs. Ferguson commentary. Yeah, they're crazy.
Yeah. So pretty much the same.
Next week's poets are romantic in the traditional sense of the word. Love sonnets by a famous poet named Elizabeth Barrett Browning. And she is married to Robert Browning, who is also a famous poet. I can't think if there's another like husband-wife dynamic duo of poets or not, but she is the author. Please tell me that you've heard this line. You know how I say this is famous, and then you look at me and you're like, no, you made that up. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways.
Yeah.
Do we know this?
Yeah.
Yay. It's Sonnet 43 of Elizabeth Barrett Browning.
You've
And
never
yes,
heard that line.
the title pretty much tells you the whole thing. She's going to count the ways she loves him.
Not so excessively that I remember it.
Just didn't stick with you. That's okay. Maybe it will now. Because you're going to read it out loud every day this week, aren't you? Because I know you do. Every week. We have, so these are sonnets. So you can expect to find 4, 4, 4, 2, or perhaps 8 and 6, depending on the type of sonnet. You can peruse them and decide which kind they are. The second one is, the first line is, Beloved, thou hast brought me many flowers, which tells you a little bit of the subject matter. But I want you to when you read this poem, I want you to think, what is she giving him? Because this poem is about, you've brought me flowers, here's what I'm giving back to you. See if you can figure out what she's giving back to him. Happy reading and reciting. Okay. And
Nice to figure out.
hopefully you are working on your Antithesis in A Tale of Two Cities papers. Do you have any questions?
No.
Like, I feel like you've done a lot of these sorts of papers for me, and so have you been able to pick at least 3 antithesis pairs? Have you at least produced some sort of outline? Carter's nodding, but it's very okay. I will trust you. I believe you. Just bring those for me next week, all right? But not you guys, because you will bring it to me in January, because I will not see you till then. They have till January to write their. I know,
Wow.
I know.
Wow.
I know, but they have one less week than we do. They only have 30 weeks, and they're taking off for Christmas a week earlier than we are. Not that they're slackers or anything. Okay, so on to Frankenstein. I wanted to ask you, I told you last week that there are 2 versions, and it doesn't really matter for the plot which version you have. Is Elizabeth, in your version, his actual physical cousin, or has she been adopted from a poor family? How about your Elizabeth? Was she adopted? Okay,
Yeah.
that means you have the 1831 version. One of the differences between them is in 1818, she was his physical cousin. For whatever reason, Mary Shelley decided to switch that up. So the introduction that I read out of, where it told the story of how she, it was that year without a summer, and because that volcano erupted, Mount Tambora, and I gave you the paper on that last week, and they had nothing to do in Geneva because the weather was so crummy. And Byron said, let's all write a ghost story. And I read a portion of that. That's the 1831 introduction. And there was a portion of that. I'm going to go back to that introduction. So if you have the 1831, you would have this introduction. She says that one night, she couldn't think of a story and she couldn't think of a story. And one night Byron and Shelley stayed up late and they were talking about the nature of the principle of life and whether there was any probability of its ever being discovered or communicated. They talked of the experiments of Dr. Darwin, who's Charles Darwin's grandpa, who preserved a piece of vermicelli in a glass case. Do you know what vermicelli is? It's spaghetti. It's a noodle. Yeah, this makes it interesting, doesn't it? Who preserved a piece of vermicelli in a glass case till by some extraordinary means it began to move with voluntary motion.
Are we sure that he
I
wasn't
don't believe
a
this.
nut?
Like, I think there must have been, like, maggots in it or something. Because I'm telling you, if you put spaghetti in a case, if you do this week, put some spaghetti in a case, and if it moves by itself, please tell me.
Either that or he spent a lot of time alone and kind of like...
Yeah, don't know about that. Okay, but moving on. Not thus, after all, would life be given. Perhaps a corpse would be reanimated. Galvanism had given token of such things. Perhaps the components of a creature might be manufactured, brought together, and endued with vital warmth. Okay, so Byron and Shelley the night before were talking about galvanism. I found a paper on galvanism. He did this in 1802-03. So she's writing in, 1815, 16. So this is only a decade old news. So there's a guy, I know his name is Galvanus, something like that. And he did experiments with electricity. Where electricity, kind of not a new thing exactly, but experimenting with electricity had been in vogue for the 50 years before. Think if you're Mary Shelley, say 60 years ago, Ben Franklin did his kite key lightning experiment. And people were doing all of these kind of parlor tricks and like invite your friends over and play with electricity, that sort of thing. So this guy got the idea to use electricity to okay, so he'd like take dead frog legs and he'd touch them with electrical probes and they'd flop around. I mean, you shouldn't laugh, but it's just very weird. So he had a student, John Aldini, and this is a paper, I cut and pasted this from the internet. There's much more. So if you just take a fancy to galvanism and you want to know all about it, you can look this up. There's even pictures, which I did not reproduce in this. But he wanted to try expanding his horizons with galvanism, so he needed bodies. I'm not making this up. He says the bodies of persons who had died of disease were not proper for my purpose, because it is to be presumed that the development of the principle which occasions death destroys the elasticity of the fibers, and that the humors are changed from their natural to a corrupted state. Okay, I don't want sick or diseased specimens, because their disease might have damaged them in some way. I was obliged, if I may be allowed the expression, to place myself under the scaffold near the axe of justice, to receive the yet bleeding bodies of unfortunate criminals, the only subjects proper for my experiments. So remember Jerry Cruncher, who digs up bodies and sells them to science. Perhaps this is one of the the things that they might have been used for. But I was reading about this and I found out condemned and executed criminals, you could use their bodies for any sort of experiments you wanted. That was the main source. It wasn't so much grave robbers like Jerry Cruncher. And I read about one guy, and he was about to be executed, and he was begging them not to use his body. He really didn't want his body used for experiments, but I don't think they cared how he felt about it because he was a criminal. So it says, I obtained from the government the bodies of 2 brigands who were decapitated at Bologna in the month of January 1802. So he got their heads. And here's what he did. The first of these decapitated criminals being conveyed to the apartment provided for my experiments in the neighborhood of the place of execution, the head was first subjected to the galvanic action. For this purpose I had constructed a pile consisting of 100 pieces of silver and zinc, having moistened the inside of the ears with salt water. I formed an arc with 2 metallic wires, which proceeding from the 2 ears, were applied, one to the summit and the other to the bottom of the pile. When this communication was established, I observed strong contractions in all the muscles of the face, which were contorted in so irregular a manner that they exhibited the appearance of the most horrid grimaces. The action of the eyelids was exceedingly striking, though less sensible in the human head than in that of an ox. Okay, so he did it to the other one. He made the other one drool. Then, because why not, he put them in a row, like lights in a series, and he made them grimace at each other.
Wow.
What
Yeah.
you say, act intelligent in case your parents watch. And then talks about it.
This is intelligent. Okay, so I did not read all of this. Here's the rest of it, and you can look it up if you want to. There's pictures of the frog legs, jerking and the heads. Oh my gosh. Just terrible.
I don't know, a saying I like to use when I hear things like this is, how can someone so smart be so dumb?
Well, so here's the thing. It seems silly to us, but they really... Okay, so think back to Descartes and his idea of we're just machines, right? Basically, our bodies are machines, and we don't know, like we're some sort of soul trapped in a machine, we don't know. But if our bodies are simply machines, we ought to be able to figure out exactly how our bodies work, just like we can figure out how machines work. And if our bodies break down, maybe we can fix them like we can fix machines. And so now we kind of smile and say, oh, it's so much more complicated than that. And it is. But at the time, they really thought this was a legitimate pursuit. And so the idea of finding out what life is, where life comes from, seemed like a scientifically explorable thing, where for us, scientific advances have just shown us how much more complicated a human being is than we even imagined, But this comes on the tail end of all the explosion of science, right? Oh, by the way, my son is in the bedroom. It's not haunted. He's in there doing his schoolwork. It was just, Yeah, that creaking and the look on both your face. Like Frankenstein, like I was experimenting this week and something was going to walk out that was just really alarming. No, that's not happening. So think 1400s, 1500s, we have uh, Galileo, Copernicus, and then we have Newton much later. But we have this explosion, and this reminds me. There's a paragraph. Do you remember when Victor goes to school and he meets two different professors? There's one that he really doesn't like very much, but there's one, the second one he visits, he's more more fond of. And remember that Victor had been reading sort of books that teach alchemy and all sorts of exploded, he called exploded science, outdated, nobody believes it anymore. But this is what this professor says. The ancient teachers of this science promised impossibilities and performed nothing. The modern masters promise very little. They know that chemicals cannot be transmuted. But these philosophers, whose hands seem only made to dabble in dirt, and their eyes to pore over the microscope or crucible, have indeed performed miracles. They penetrate into the recesses of nature and show how she works in her hiding places. They ascend into the heavens. They have discovered how the blood circulates and the nature of the air we breathe. They have acquired new and almost unlimited powers. They can command the thunders of heaven, mimic the earthquake, and even mock the invisible world with its own shadows. So this is a summary of what can science do. Science can't turn lead into gold like the alchemists were trying to do. We don't have the sorcerer's stone or the philosopher's stone, that will give us the elixir of life and help us live forever. But we know how to manipulate electricity. We have dissected bodies and we know how they work. And so, maybe it looks like we promise little, but we've actually achieved great things. So anyway, so before we say, shocking dismembered animals and people with electrical probes is weird. It is a little weird, actually. They really thought that they were coming one step closer to deciding what makes something alive. And now we would say, yeah, that's not even close to being alive. It's interesting that, have you guys ever seen a movie version of Frankenstein? Like one of the old Boris Karloff? Have you ever seen clips? Like, if I say movie version of Frankenstein, do you have any image in your head at all?
Yes.
Okay. He's got electrodes right out of his neck, and there's usually some sort of apparatus in the lab, and often it involves electricity. But notice Mary Shelley doesn't mention anything about zapping him with electricity or anything like that. She does use the phrase, Victor uses the phrase, the spark of life. And maybe people got the idea because galvanism, she used the word spark of life, that perhaps there was electricity involved. We don't really know what Victor did at all, do we? Why, do you remember why we don't know exactly what he did?
Because you couldn't do it?
Well, he did do it, right? He did bring something to life, though.
Yeah, but like in real life you couldn't.
No. Oh, I see. Because she wouldn't know how to explain it. Well, that's probably the case. But Mary Shelley does something with the character that makes it so she doesn't have to try to explain it. Walton, who we're going to talk about in a minute, Walton asks him, well, he doesn't ask him. Victor's telling the story, and he says, "Oh, I can see you're curious. I can see you want to know, but I am never, ever, ever going to tell anyone else on earth this secret because what a horrible thing I did, and I don't want anyone else to ever do it." So there, right away, Mary Shelley doesn't have to explain because Victor refuses to explain. He doesn't want the secret to get out because he doesn't want anyone else to try the experiment. It's kind of convenient that he is sworn to, silence because of his abhorrence of what he's done. So Walton is the ship captain who's writing letters to his sister. What does Walton want to do, and why does he want to do it?
Travel the seas.
Yes.
I don't know.
because they're there.
Because
He wants to go to a particular place, actually.
Wasn't it like the North Pole?
He wants to go to the North Pole. He wants to go north. And he says early on in, I think this is his first letter to his sister. Yes. What may not be expected in a country of eternal light? I may there discover the wondrous power which attracts the needle, and may regulate 1,000 celestial observations that require only this voyage to render their seeming eccentricities consistent forever. I will satiate my ardent curiosity with the sight of a part of the world never before visited, and may tread a land never before imprinted by the foot of man. So what is it? He wants to go to the North Pole, but what does he really want?
To discover a place.
To do something no one, boldly go where no man has gone before. Right? And I guess my question is, yeah, and plant his flag, right? Plant his flag. Like, I was here. He's going to scratch on a rock. Walton was here. No, there's no rock. But what is he going to get out of it? What does somebody pursuing something like that, what do they get out of it for themselves? What's in it for them?
Fame.
Fame.
they'll be in the history book.
They'll be in the history book. Fame and glory. Right? He does say, so after he picks up Victor, he does say this to him. One man's life or death were but a small price to pay for the acquirement of the knowledge which I sought, for the dominion I should acquire and transmit over the elemental foes of our race. So he does want fame, he does want glory, but apparently he also wants power. Do you remember when we were talking about Descartes? I mentioned Francis Bacon, and we all had a laugh over his unfortunate last name. But he's accredited with the saying, knowledge is power. What do we study science for? So we can have power over nature. And Walton says the same thing. He says, it doesn't matter if somebody dies, for the power I will gain over the elemental foes of our race. So my first question for you is, so Walton wants to go and explore magnetism and the North Pole and everything. What are the elemental foes of humanity that you think Walton wants to, like, what power over nature do you think this is going to give him? I don't know. I'm not fishing for a particular answer. I mean, I suppose knowing more about magnetism leads to better compasses, and we don't get lost when we sail. I don't know what other power over nature he thinks this is going to give him. Do you think just proving somebody can go to a place of extreme cold and hardship where nobody's been? I mean, it does almost kill them, right? They get trapped in the ice. There's mutinies breaking out because they think they're all going to die. I'm not sure what he thinks, what foe of humanity he thinks is going to overcome. But what foe does Victor want to overcome? What elemental foe of humanity does he think he will overcome with his experiment? It's not a trick. It's fairly easy, the thing I'm fishing for. What is he turning back? What is he overcoming?
Death.
Death, yes. Bringing life and overcoming death. He doesn't want to overcome life. Yeah, he's going to overcome death with this. And so I got to thinking, and the classes, because this is the third time I've had this discussion this week, and so things come up in various discussions. And one thing is, so psychologically, for Victor, is there anything in his life that might give him a drive to want to overcome death? Did something happen to him that might give him a fixation on bringing life and overcoming death? Just think of
I always thought it might be to prove something to his father because at the time he was like kind of just pushed him aside when he said something about.
Oh, definitely. He could be trying to prove something to his dad. Like you said I wasted my time, but take that. I brought life. But think of what else happened. Yeah, his dad wasn't real thrilled with his early research. But what else happened in his younger life?
His mother died.
His mother died.
And I guess if you can bring that monster to life, you can probably bring a real person.
And he even says, maybe I'll find it as we go through the book, he makes a comment that I thought that if I could reanimate this tissue, this creature I've put together, perhaps I could go and undo the effects for someone else or others. Fill in maybe the blank, fill in his mom. Obviously this thing haunts him because, do you remember he was, he worked for months on this creature, and Henry came to visit him and he was not well. The lily was on his brow in the moist, whatever, like the poem. He was not well. And I guess it was the night the creature came alive. He had a dream. Do you remember this kind of freakish dream he had? It was disturbing.
I remember him having a
Yeah.
dream.
Okay. He says, I slept, indeed, but I was disturbed by the wildest dreams. I thought I saw Elizabeth in the bloom of health, walking in the streets of Ingolstadt. Delighted and surprised, I embraced her, but as I imprinted the first kiss on her lips, they became livid with the hue of death. Her features appeared to change, and I thought that I held the corpse of my dead mother in my arms. A shroud enveloped her form, and I saw the grave worms crawling in the folds of the flannel. Okay, that's disturbing. But apparently the death of his mother is somewhat on his mind. I mean, he's just come from reanimating, like giving life to this creature, and he sleeps, and the first thing he dreams of is his dead mother. But it's a creepy dream. Did you want to say something, Carter? You looked like you had that look about you, that I want to talk look. Who's telling this story? Okay, Victor is telling the story. Actually, technically,
It's Walton.
Walton is telling the story because he's writing this in a letter to his sister. So this is being told by Victor through Walton, or Walton is telling us Victor's testimony. So here's one question. When someone tells a story of their own life, do they necessarily tell everything exactly the way it really happened? No, we tend to leave things out. We tend to, how even if you don't do it on purpose, sometimes you look back on events and someone else who was there has a very different view of what happened because the picture, like when you remember it, I read something or saw a video once about memory, how our memory works. And you remember this event in the past, but you remember it in a skewed way. And then every time you remember that, you remember your skewed version. And you see the skewed version so many times that you lose sight of the actual version. Especially if something happens to you as a young child. You have this kind of not quite right view of what it was like and what happened. And so we have to ask ourselves, how clear is Victor's vision? He's obviously been through some trauma. So he tells us things, and then I kind of wonder, Victor, how much should I believe you? So tell me a little bit about his childhood. What kind of family did he come from? I mean, his mom died, but other than that, how does he describe his young childhood?
Sounded pretty good.
It sounded pretty good, actually. He says they traveled all around Europe. My mother's tender caresses and my father's smile of benevolent pleasure are my first recollections. And then he says this about them. I was their child, the innocent and helpless creature bestowed on them by heaven, whom to bring up to good and whose future lot it was in their hands to direct to happiness or misery, according as they fulfilled their duties toward me. I am their child. I am their creation, so to speak. And their treatment of me will lead me on the path that I'm going to follow. I'm sure you see the connection. Because when the creature encounters Victor, what's his complaint to Victor?
That he didn't pay enough attention.
You dumped me. You ran away from me. You left me to my own devices. You're not a good father, Victor. But Victor had a good father, and he says his childhood was really great, but he says this in 2 paragraphs, one after the other. This paragraph starts, "No human being could have passed a happier childhood than myself." Great. And then the next paragraph starts, "My temper was sometimes violent, and my passions vehement." You had a wonderful, glorious childhood, but you're violent? What does that mean? Maybe it means he just wanted things strongly. He paints this idyllic picture, but then he slides in there, I had a difficult temperament. Maybe I was a difficult child. He even says in the same paragraph, "It was the secrets of heaven and earth that I desired to learn." And he says the physical secrets of the world. I don't know, I guess you could have a totally happy childhood and still want to find out the secrets of the world. It sounds to me like somebody's lacking something. You know what I mean? I want something more than what I've been given. I don't.
It sounds like maybe he was spoiled and a little bit too much and didn't have the discipline that he needed.
Perhaps. One of the changes, so Elizabeth being his cousin versus Elizabeth being adopted is one of the changes in the 2 versions. Another change, like I said, she didn't really change the plot at all, but one of the changes was insinuating in the 1831 version that it's fate or destiny has led Victor to do this. So that he's not, yeah, I dropped my glasses. That he's not as responsible. He says here, "Destiny was too potent, and her immutable laws had decreed my utter and terrible destruction." Find another place where he talks about destiny. "Thus ended a day memorable to me. It decided my future destiny." It makes it sound a little bit like it's not Victor's fault. It was all fate that put these books in his path and brought him to Ingolstadt, to this particular professor, and just let him, like, I couldn't help it. It was destiny. I don't know. It almost reminds me like Aaron, the high priest Aaron in the golden calf. Remember he says in Exodus, "I just threw in the gold and this calf came out." No. Like Victor's like, "It was destiny. I just put some body parts together and this creature came out." No, Victor, that is not what happened. So this, I do not claim that I found this out for myself, that I noticed it for myself, but I was reading several commentaries as we got ready for this, and one of them pointed out something highly disturbing. He's talking about gathering what he needs to make this creature, and he says, "I collected bones from charnel houses and disturbed the tremendous secrets of the human frame." He put them all in this workshop, he says, at the top of the house, separated by a gallery and a staircase. But then he says, here's 2 other places he went. "The dissecting room and the slaughterhouse furnished many of my materials." Okay, I understand what we're getting in the dissecting room. What do you get from a slaughterhouse? What is at a slaughterhouse?
Animal parts.
Animal parts. Oh my gosh. Apparently he used animal parts. Which, now I'm seeing ears. Like it could be a very interesting creature. I don't know. He doesn't specify. Like hearts. Yesterday during class, there was a lot of talk about livers and hearts and, and whether you could make the animal one. I don't know. He made the creature large to make it easy to work with.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe he needed a larger heart.
I
That's disturbing. It's got animal
Chicken
bits.
brain.
Well, he's very eloquent if he has a chicken brain.
He is really good for a chicken brain.
I know, I was thinking like, well, in like shows and stuff, whenever he's depicted, it's like as some big dumb.
Which,
animal.
did it surprise you when he walks up to Victor and just starts saying, "Hello, Victor. Let me
Yes.
tell you about myself."
Yes.
What is this?
Yes.
There's a movie which I can't fully, like, you should get parental permission before you watch this, but I don't know if you're familiar with a man named Mel Brooks. He makes movies and they're just outrageously stupidly funny, just stupid movies. And one of them's called Young Frankenstein, and it's about a man. He's like the great grandson of Victor Frankenstein, and he inherits his castle, and he's spent his whole life not trying to be associated with that family, so he calls himself Frankenstein because he doesn't want to, he pronounces it Frankenstein. And he goes and he finds his grandfather's laboratory and he finds his notes and he's actually reading out of this. So he decides that it could work and he decides to try it again. So he collects pieces, but he has this assistant, and his assistant is kind of goofy and not very bright, and he sends him to this laboratory and he wants to get the brain of the most intelligent man, and his name was like Hans Delbruck, I think. And so he goes to this place, and there's a bunch of jars with brains and they're labeled, and he gets Hans Delbruck's brain. It's like, okay. And then lightning flashes and it scares him and he drops it and it breaks and the brain spills all over. He's like, okay. So he picks up another one and he doesn't look at the name, and it says abnormal brain, do not use. And so when he goes home, or he goes back to the doctor, they bring the monster to life, and of course he's like he is in movies, he's like, what's wrong with Hans Delbruck's brain? He's like, I dropped it. He's like, well, whose brain did you bring? He said, oh, I don't know, Abby someone. He's like, Abby who? Abby Normal. Anyway. Which is a joke that like you said, in the movie versions, he's usually mute, incoherent, like he doesn't understand anything.
Like this.
Yes, like not very agile. This creature is also very agile, isn't he? Like he's climbing cliffs, and he's super strong, he's smart, he's very different than the movie versions. But apparently he has some animal parts. I will leave it to you to decide what animal parts they might be. So he brings it to life, and he says, his limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features beautiful. Beautiful! Great God! His yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was of a lustrous black, his teeth of pearly whiteness, but these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes that seemed almost of the same color as the dun-white sockets in which they were set, his shriveled complexion and straight black lips. So, he gets a look at this thing, and what's he do? It opens his eyes, and what's he do?
Runs away.
He runs away. He runs away, and then what does he do?
Doesn't he like stop and wait for something?
He does, except he waits in a strange way. Here's what it says. That he'd wanted to do this for so long, and now that he did it, he's disgusted with it. Now, question number 1. Did he not notice it was ugly? He's been looking at it for months. Did it just only occur to him that this coming to life would be kind of disgusting and frightening? Apparently it just now hit him. So he leaves the room, and he says, I rushed out of the room and continued a long time traversing my bedchamber, unable to compose my mind to sleep. At length lassitude succeeded to the tumult I had before endured. I threw myself on the bed in my clothes, endeavoring to seek a few minutes of forgetfulness. He took a nap. You just left a creature upstairs. I don't even know what to say to that. It's in the same house. You brought something to life and then you took a nap. So it could just do whatever. And of course it does. He wakes up and it's looking at him. You know. And he runs outside. Like, buddy. This is why I wonder, is Victor coherent and sane telling this story? That seems like an odd choice.
Yeah.
To be terrified. If you had something terrifying in the attic, would you just go take a nap?
I was talking to my sister about the plot of the book, and she's just like, so he's a madman, right? And I go, and I couldn't answer, and I was like, yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, but not really, in a way. Do you know what I mean? Like madman in the sense, I guess, of becoming obsessed with one idea to the exclusion of all else. So like he wants to bestow life so much that he doesn't realize, oh, what will this thing be like when it's alive? What will it do? What will I need to do for it? You know, maybe this hideous thing walking around is not something the world is ready for. Maybe it's not something I'm ready for. But yeah, going and taking a nap seems misguided at the very best.
Something that you should have thought of before you did that was, everything. Like, is this gonna work out well for me if it actually does work?
Yes. And of course, it does not work. The monster disappears. I should call him the creature. Okay, in all fairness, I should not refer to him as the monster. The creature disappears, and a couple of years pass. Now, the place where I had you guys stop reading, you should be in the middle of the creature retelling his story. Is that roughly where you are?
Mm-hmm.
He's met Victor out in the wilds in the Alps, and he's invited him to his hut. And he's telling the story of, how did I learn to speak? What have I been doing for the last 2 years? How have I been spending my time? And obviously one of the things he's done is kill William. He is going to confess to that. I guess you don't. Okay, spoiler alert. He did kill William. He did kill William, if you haven't already read that.
I was kind of mad.
I mean, we pretty much knew that was the case. And he framed Justine.
I was kind of mad that the other lady died because, like, Frankenstein was aware that it was his monster who did it, and he just, like, let it go. I'm like...
And somebody mentioned this yesterday, too. Like, you would think that if he were a real man, a good man, even if he didn't think people were going to believe him, said, hey, I brought a dead thing to life that I sewed together out of parts, and it got angry, and I'm pretty sure it killed William. And everybody probably would have said, Victor, you need counseling or, imprisonment in a psych ward. Yes, you need medical help. But at least his conscience would have been clear, right? So it's really true when he says, I am responsible for William and Justine. Okay, I feel like he's responsible for Justine in more than one way, because he didn't even try to save her. And again, so he's retelling this story, looking back on it. We don't know, how long in the future it is at this point, but he kind of glosses over it. I feel like Victor glosses over it in the retelling. Well, nobody'd believe me, so what's the point? No, you could have tried.
And then it was just like, and the next day she was dead, and I was like, wait, hold up a second. Whoa, slow down there, buddy.
Yes.
She's just dead now because you
didn't say anything.
Up.
Yes. Let me find one thing, and I think I forgot to talk about this in my other classes. Mary Shelley, married to Percy Shelley of Skylark fame, as you don't know, hung out with the Romantic poets, and we talked about how nature was so important to them. And did you notice the detailed descriptions of nature when he's traveling around this? The immense mountains and precipices that overhung me on every side, the sound of the river raging among the rocks, and the dashing of the waterfalls around spoke of a power mighty as omnipotence. And there's very long paragraphs in this where he describes landscapes. And I feel like that's the romantic poet coming out. We celebrate landscapes, but they're often very bleak, barren, lonely. One thing, this is another one of those changes from 1818 to 1831. In the early version, when he went on his travels, after William and Justine are dead, he goes with his family. His dad and Elizabeth come with him, so that Mary Shelley has to get a reason for him to escape from them and go out by his own and meet the creature. And then in the 1831, he just goes alone. I'm not sure why he didn't just go alone the first time around. But he goes and he rambles and he thinks of the beautiful nature. Of course, what does he want to do? Explore the secrets of nature. But he found out that when he did, it wasn't so good. So yes, so the creature encounters him. Oh, by the way, before we move on to what the creature says, did you catch the mention of the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner?
Yes, I did. I actually was going to mention that one.
Good. It was mentioned twice. Here's what the monster says. I was benevolent and good. Misery made me a fiend. Make me happy, and I shall again be virtuous. And later he says, maybe he's, oh, no, I'm sorry, it was right before that. I'm going to go the couple sentences right before. Remember that I am thy creature. I ought to be thy Adam, but I am rather the fallen angel, whom thou drivest from joy for no misdeed. Everywhere I see bliss, from which I alone am irrevocably excluded. Then he says, I was benevolent and good, misery made me a fiend. Make me happy, and I shall again be virtuous. So here's my question for you. Do we sin? Are we evil because we've been treated with evil? Or, a side question, does Mary Shelley believe that as long as we're treated well, we will be good? If we're treated badly, we will become bad. What do you think of that philosophy of life?
Well, I think that in a way it can be true, but in one specific way is that usually the people who are treated even worse, younger or anything like that, or like tragedy and stuff like that, traumas, sometimes they end up being worse because of it. But I don't, human beings ourselves, we aren't really treated with evil.
What do you think?
I think that Mary thought that, but I don't think that's true. Because Jesus was around evil.
Okay. We could say, well, Jesus is a special case. He is a special case, but he's also fully human.
There are also a lot of other examples of
the evils cause bigger temptations, but you don't have to follow through.
Okay, I like that. It may be greater temptation. We do see obvious cases where somebody had a very, very bad childhood and then they grow up to a life of crime. But we see many cases where people had a bad childhood and they don't. We also see cases of people who seem to have a perfect upbringing and they just snap and they turn into something horrible. And so, this idea, it's the two things, right? Is evil something we carry with us because we're human beings and we're fallen human beings? We weren't supposed to be this way. Or is it something that's done to us? And sometimes it's referred to as nature versus nurture. You know, what causes us to be a certain way? Is it our upbringing? Is it things that happen to us? Or is it just implanted in us? And, you know, so some scientists are looking for a gene for everything, right? Like there's a gene for being gay, and there's a gene for I don't know, probably being a serial killer or something like that. I don't know. There's probably people studying that, honestly. I mean, I'm kind of making that up, but I'm kind of assuming that there's probably research being done about people who are criminals and studying their genetic makeup and comparing. Um, what's the? Let me just ask. What would be the danger in deciding that, you know, whether or not you're going to be a serial killer or a saint is all in your DNA? What would be a downside to that?
Because you're not giving them a chance to be good.
Okay. What does it leave out? What sort of human?
It leaves out your personality, your what God made actually. Like the whole idea of God making us all different.
Mm-hmm.
Because by saying that you're going to be exactly like this whole genetic makeup, you're going to be exactly like your relations before.
Mm-hmm.
And saying that is saying you're all the same.
Mm-hmm.
You can't. It's like saying you have bad blood or something
Mm-hmm.
like that.
And there's no free will, right? There's no.
Mm-hmm.
How did you have anything to add to that? How would that be any different than fate? I mean, would it be different to say I'm destined to become this thing because I'm genetically programmed to be it? I kind of don't see how that's different than saying it's my destiny, it's my fate.
The funny thing is about all these people deciding their fate is that you can't decide that for yourself.
No.
It's not something that is in your hands. It's not something that is in anyone like that's hands. It's not something that can just be, it's not something like randomly thrown out there. Oh, we're going to throw this book in your path, so you have to be like that. A book doesn't change your life.
Yes.
Although it can make effects on your life, it can't change you if you don't let it.
Yes. There has to be cooperation, right? We cooperate with it. Then on the flip side, well, I want to say it's the flip side, but now that I think about it, it's sort of like the same coin but two sides. Because well, on the one hand, okay, I'm just evil. I'm programmed to be evil. But on the other, I can't help it. It's all my upbringing, which would be the creature's perspective. Like, I was a clean slate. People mistreated me, and you're still in the process of reading about his story, so I don't want to, point out. We'll talk about that more next week. But I've been shunned. I mean, my own father, my own creator, for crying out loud, screamed and ran out of the room. This would not make you feel good, I can imagine. But so now I have to be evil. Is that like, my genes program me or circumstances made me, but neither side has any sort of free choice. Like, bad things have happened or I have strikes against me, but I will choose to overcome them. Apparently the creature never thought of saying, you know what? I can be better than they are.
Then again, no one was there to teach him that.
No one was there to teach him that.
And if Frankenstein had been there, he probably would have taught him the same thing that he believes anyways.
It's a hard question. But it does, I think that what Carter said is appropriate, that we see the flaws, but I wonder if Mary Shelley herself, being rather, I don't know if we want to call her an atheist, Percy Shelley did skirt the edges of atheism, if not flat out, and also just a lot of, I mean, when she was young, she wrote it the first time, so we can't really account the bad things that happened over the years, losing 3 children, losing her husband. It changed her perspective because this hadn't happened yet when she wrote this. But certainly the upbringing she had was not a godly upbringing, we'd say. So, But here's another thing to think about. So if the creature says to Victor, I'm your Adam, what does that make Victor?
His creation.
His
Creator.
Yeah, the God. Basically the equivalent of God to the creature. So the creature says to God, or I'm going to paraphrase, I'm kind of filling in different terms. The creature says to God, you made me, it all your fault. It's your fault these things happen to me. It's your fault that I've done these things. Can you imagine there being a person who might have that attitude towards God? What is there about life that we might accuse God of, if we were so inclined?
Any of our troubles.
Any of our troubles. All evil in the world. If you don't believe in creation and the fall, if you're like, God made it like this. Stuff's dying all the time. People are getting sick. We get hurt. We get lonely. We get sad and cold. If God made it that way, then I could see an attitude that would say, yeah, you're not much of a creator. I don't like this thing. I don't like the way you created. But as Christians, we can't really say that. But I wonder if Mary Shelley was saying that. I don't know.
She would be very wrong, though, because unlike Frankenstein did to his monster, God didn't abandon us.
God did not abandon us. We abandoned him. It's as if the creature walked out on Victor and then came back and accused him. Well, you didn't do stuff for me. You left. I tried. I made you a little bedroom, like an 8-foot-long bed. I'm trying to imagine what the creature's bedroom decorations would look like now. Maybe it's better left unimagined.
I can only think of, like, whenever I think of Frankenstein, I can only... Did you ever watch the show The Munsters?
Oh, as a very small child. Oh, I'm very familiar with the Munsters.
Yes. So am I, because that was a decision made when I was younger that my siblings would fall in love with TV shows that were still black and white.
Yes, like Andy Griffith and Elijah. Yes, I'm familiar with his Floyd,
Andy
his
Griffith.
Pink Floyd shirt, which I love.
Andy Griffith. What's the one about that witch? And,
Bewitched.
Yeah, Bewitched. Actually, this is all because of my great grandma and grandpa, I think.
I Dream of Jeannie.
I Dream of Jeannie. All these.
Gilligan's Island.
Yeah, Gilligan's Island. That was.
It's brilliant.
Ooh.
It's a masterpiece.
Although I think that one was in color though. The one about the guys in the German, like the.
Hogan's Heroes.
What?
Hogan's Heroes?
Yeah.
Okay, back to
I
this.
don't remember the names, just remember them very well.
Yes, it is. I will admit that Herman Munster has also popped into my head on occasion when I'm reading this. So, just to wrap up, the place where you are now, he went out. I mean, his creator ran out on him, and he had to go shift for himself, as they say. He had to figure out what he can eat, how to drink. He didn't understand anything. He didn't understand day and night. He didn't understand cold and heat. He saw fire, but he didn't know you can't stick your hand in the fire. There was no one to teach him these things. But now he has taken up, I picture this as a cottage, and they've got like a lean-to where, but it's enclosed where they can store things, but apparently they never, ever, ever use it because he lives in there for a long time, and he can kind of spy through a hole, a chink in the wall, and he can listen. He also found some books, and apparently because the boy at the DeLacy's was teaching the Safi, the girl who came to read. Maybe I'm getting ahead. Has Safi already come? I apologize if I'm getting ahead. It's kind of one continuous story. It's an awkward place where I had you stop, but it was just for length's purpose. It wasn't because the story wrapped. Anyway, he's going to learn to read. He's going to learn about humankind, and that's what you're going to read this coming week. So I would like you for next time to finish Frankenstein, finish your Tale of Two Cities papers, read your poetry, read about galvanism. Is there anything else? I don't think so. So I'd like to just, everything else we want to talk about, I'd like to do after you finish the book. So goodbye to Wednesday students who are watching this.